The reason that a lot of people have been moving over to Gulp from Grunt is its simple and really easy to understand API. If you compare configuration files from a Grunt file over to a Gulp file, you'll notice that the Gulp file is usually less lines and way easier to read. The different things that the Gulp API provides us is to create tasks using gulp.task. We can bring in different files that we need. Let's say we wanted to compile a SAS file to CSS. We could tell Gulp, hey, this is the source. So we would point to some SAS files. We could also tell Gulp where to point our output, which would be under gulp.destination. And all of these would run our tasks and output the files where we want them. But what about if we want to watch a couple different files so that Gulp will restart the task every time we save a file? We can do that quickly and easily using gulp.watch. We will create our first task now. If you've ever built using Node, you know that we can bring in a dependency, var gulp is equal to require. So we're using require here to pull in our gulp dependency. And then just like we saw from the Gulp API, we'll create a new task, gulp.task default. And we'll pass in a function here. Since it's JavaScript, we'll console log, look at my first Gulp task. That's all there is to it. We just created our very first Gulp task called default. We can run that from the command line using Gulp. We have our console log output, and we started and finished our default task in 120 milliseconds. While that was a very simple task, we'll look at creating a couple different tasks for creating CSS and for concatenating and minifying our JavaScript files. For now, it's important to note that gulp.task default is the task that Gulp will look for when you run the gulp command. We could also name this something differently like CSS and call that task specifically, gulp CSS, and that will run the same task. If we run Gulp now, that default task is not defined anymore, so Gulp won't know what to run. We'll change that back. And moving forward, let's get into some real-life examples that we can actually use for our projects.